excited to announce our next speaker. I see that she's already here. Hi, Lexi, and welcome. Lexi is Senior Manager at Twitter, speaker and freedom fighter. Her main mission is to inspire people to create their desired life journey by understanding their purpose and life goals. In her own words, people deserve to live the lives that caters to their strengths and passions. Enjoy her session on building an authentic career brand. Lexi, the stage is all yours.
Perfect. I'm trying to share my screen, Anna, and it's not letting me. Okay, we're gonna try this one more time, and then we're just gonna do it without slides. That's what we're gonna do. And then for folks on the call, I can definitely email you the slides if you would like them. Okay, so we're just gonna go ahead and get started.
Awesome.
Lexi B. As Anna said, I am currently the Senior Program Manager for Privacy at Twitter. But I've worked at multiple tech companies, and this conversation is not necessarily about where I've worked, but what I've learned and where I've worked there. And so I first want to start with open the discussion. Whenever I do public speaking, I always tell people that we have to honor where we come from. And for me as a speaker, it really comes when it comes to my mother. My mother, I think, is one of the best people in the whole wide world, and she is very definitely an inspiration of mine. And so I always like to make that point. In my presentation, and unfortunately, we do not have the slides. What I like to talk about is the art of storytelling. I do believe that in order to have a fulfilling career, you need to be able to tell your story and tell it very, very, very well. And what does that look like? In order to tell your story, there are actually 4 main buckets of that. There is fellowship, storytelling, owning your narrative, strengths versus opportunities, and reintroduction. So let's start there. It was Aretha Franklin who once said, being the queen is not all about singing, and being a diva is not all about singing, but it is a lot to do with social contributions in the community. And so when you think about fellowship, everyone has a right and has a story to tell when it comes to fellowship. And I really do not like the word networking. I think networking is really not impactful when it comes to your career. It's really about how do we engage with people on a human level? How do we fellowship? So when it comes to my career personally, I always tell folks, I'm not looking for mentors. I'm looking for elders. I'm looking for people that really understand me fully, because that will inspire my career and the transitions that I make, the transactions that I do, and how I want to move forward. So my advice when it comes to fellowship really is you need to find your tribe. You need to find the people who understand you. Many times you can look at your own identity. I am the founder of a group called Sister Circle Black Women in Tech, for Black women in the tech industry, because that's how I identify. But it doesn't necessarily have to be an identification marker. It could be people that you just feel like understand you and have these vulnerable moments. Especially as women, it is important to be vulnerable when it comes to your career. Oftentimes in your career, you're making decisions based on an actual career move, or you're making decisions about your career based on what's happening in your personal life. And both of those things can come together, and both of them can be synchronized. And so it's very important to understand that. The second layer of owning your story is to figure out who you are. One of my favorite elders of all time said this in a very important movie. It was Mufasa who told Simba, remember who you are. And I remember when I first watched The Lion King, I'm sure all of us have watched it, you don't really understand the depths of that, but you have no idea how many people I meet on a daily basis who do not do the work to figure out who they are. Who you are will define the rest of your career. And if you do not do the work to understand who you are, and therefore understand what brings you joy, what doesn't bring you joy, you are actually not building a career for you. And therefore, you are not building the story that you deserve. You have one life to live. And so understanding who you are is quite important. What does that look like? Where is your homeland? Where do you come from? I currently live in the Bay Area. I am very, very proud to say that I'm from St. Louis, Missouri, born and bred. And I always tell people, knowing that I'm from St. Louis, Missouri, knowing that I'm from the Southern Midwest is intrinsically ingrained to me. How I interact in the world, a lot of it is because of where I'm from. It's important to identify a homeland. Where in the world has impacted you the most? That's the beautiful thing about geography, is that regardless of who you talk to, when you figure out where they're from, you find a little bit more about them. So identifying where your homeland is actually very beneficial. What are your morals and values? What do you stand on? What do you stand against? I remember in my 20s, I was moving around in my career, and sometimes there were ways in which my elders in my community would say, that's not actually how you do things. How you do things in your career is about you. It doesn't have to be how someone else does things. The sooner you understand who you are and what morals and values you stand on, that will actually be the driving force of what you do in your career, who you do it with, who you decide that you would like to manage you, and what organizations you decide you would like to be a part of. And doing that work is very fundamental. I always tell folks, business is personal. Business is emotional, because business is about money. And I know I'm very emotional when it comes to my bank account, and so is everyone else. So really understanding who you are and how you walk in this world and how you want to walk in this world is actually very transformative to then figure out, and this is the career that I want. This is the path that I want to lead. And more importantly, this is how I want to show up for my coworkers and my management. And if they don't like how I show up, that does not mean that my showing up is inaccurate. It just means that this may not be my long-term transition, right? After we figure out who we are and our fellowship, we really need to discuss our narrative. So Maya Angelou, who has been such a transformative and impactful figure in my life, especially as a Black woman, I remember sitting in my bed at night and reading her stories over and over again, because she, along with some other Black female writers, really taught me how to be a Black woman and showed me the layers and the beauty and the brilliance of what it means to be a Black woman. She said, you may not control all the events that happen to you, but you can decide not to be reduced by them. And that is intrinsically important, because all of us come to the table with a story and with a background. And many parts of that story and that background we cannot control. I always tell folks that the most painful parts of your story, most of the time, you cannot control. That does not mean that those parts should be erased from your story, because that is intrinsically who you are. It also doesn't mean that you have to tell everyone if you don't feel comfortable, but it does mean that as women, we have to understand this duality in the world, professionally and personally, that it's okay to own your narrative inside you. It's okay to say, because of A, B, and C that happened in my past, this is how I react to certain things in the future. If you cannot own that, then how are your coworkers going to own that when you act a certain way in the office? How is your management going to own that when something comes up in the news and you act a certain way, or you decide to be silent, or you decide to speak out? Knowing your narrative is really important as you figure out your story, because that is part of who you are, and you shouldn't shy away from it. It really is what it is. And I really do believe that if more people did this work to figure out, this is my narrative, and part of that narrative is trauma, and part of that narrative is beauty, and part of that narrative is failure and success and fabulosity, then what would actually happen when a person comes to work? If I know who I am and I'm working in my professional career, no one else can tell me who I am. No one else can insinuate who I am. And every time someone questions my decision making or questions why I'm doing something, it is totally fine, right? Because they have a right to do that. But how impacted am I because of that? Because I know exactly who I am, right? The next thing is strength versus opportunity. And notice how I did not say weakness. I really don't like the word weakness. I love the word opportunity. And when it comes to strength, I always tell people that a good 85% of your strengths you probably had at the age of 5 and didn't even know it. I am very keen on that. There are strengths that are just ingrained to us. There are strengths that you just pop out into this world and you have. And because of how we raise children, and that's more of a psychological conversation that we can have on a different day, sometimes, many times in life, we do not cater to those strengths, right? How many times have you heard the story of the child doodling in class and getting in trouble for doodling? How many times have you heard the story of a child doodling in class, and instead of getting in trouble, they take them to class, and then in that art class, they find out about graphic design, and then in graphic design, they find out they can be the head designer for W Magazine, and then 20 years later, they own a complete graphic design studio. That journey is less common to hear about because we have these institutional knowledge and trauma and processes that unfortunately we do need to break. So I always tell folks, you need to figure out your strengths. And I guarantee you a lot of your strengths are innately you. Then we have some of these strengths that we learned. We have some of these strengths that as we grew up, we said, hey, I really want to learn that, right? So for a good example, we have people who are brilliant software engineers. Now, maybe at 5 years old, they did not know how to software engineer in Java, but maybe at 5 years old, they loved learning languages. Everything is interconnected. When it comes to your career, it is important for you to know your strengths. It is important for you to identify them before someone else identifies your weaknesses. And that comes back to knowing who you are. So then therefore, when you're in an interview, you focus on your strengths. When you're in front of your manager, you focus on your strengths. When you're writing your review, you focus on your strengths. And these areas of opportunity, they all fit into your strengths because your areas of opportunity are little parts that you see that can strengthen your strengths. Unless you are moving into a completely different career, right? And then that becomes the area of opportunity, is learning how to do that career from scratch. But if you're building on the career you already have, if you're building on the knowledge that you already have, you should be looking for areas of opportunity that strengthen what you're already good at. Because then you become stronger. Iron sharpens iron. And that's very, very important. So once we get all of this together, now it's time to reintroduce yourself, right? And it's very important to have that introduction. So let me introduce myself. And again, I'm sorry because the slides are very pretty and we don't have them with us. But who am I? Who is Lexi B? And I always tell people, if we put it into a bulletproof form, I am St. Louis raised and Bay Area remixed. I am a shoe sale appreciator. I'm a community builder. I started Sister Circle Black Women in Tech in 2017, and now it has over 6,200 Black women all over the world coming together and fellowshipping together and supporting each other. I'm a cross-functional leader in my day job. I love solving hard problems in a room of diverse people from all different parts of the company. I'm a freedom fighter. I always tell people that it's very important for me that even though I do not work in recruiting and I do not work in D&I, that I'm always fighting for equity because that's my job as a human. It's my job to make sure that I'm using my privilege to help others. It is also my job and responsibility to recognize where I do not have privilege and how can I uplift my voice and go back and forth with that. I'm a puppy mom. I have a dog. His name's Duke Ellington. He is my heart. I'm a daughter, a sister, a lover, a friend. I love to travel. I'm an avid documentary watcher. And I think the most important about me is that I am a proud Black American woman. And to that end, what has happened in this world in this past month has been so tragic to my community and should be so tragic to the rest of the world. The response has been phenomenal. And for everyone who is watching, for everyone who has been part of that response, for everyone who has decided not to be silent in the workplace, especially, I applaud you. I see you. And I thank you, because to be very honest with you, systemic racism and discrimination will not be torn down until people decide to stand up and say no. And for the people that have been silenced, I am not mad at you, but I encourage you to stand up, because when you stand up, then you become a freedom fighter. And if everyone becomes a freedom fighter, imagine what this world could look like. Thank you so much. Does anyone have any questions?
Wow. That was so touching. It gave me goosebumps, literally. Like, thanks, Lexi, for like, I don't know. You don't need slides, believe me. With your words, with your passion, with your energy, slides just, you don't need them. Wow, people did really enjoy like your like people say bravo, awesome.
Thank you.
That was really amazing. Do you have any questions for Lexi? Powerful, lots of virtual hugs from people, amazing. I'm very happy to hear that. That was I totally support all the comments here. How can we join your community?
So if you identify as a Black woman in the tech industry, because it is a safe space, you can go to Facebook, you can go to LinkedIn, Twitter, or Instagram. If you do not identify as a Black woman in tech but would like to support, feel free to reach out to me. I actually just chatted my information. You can also find me on LinkedIn as my government name, Alexandria Butler. You can find me on Twitter at By Unfiltered. And we can talk more about that because we definitely partner with organizations who believe our cause. So yes.
Yeah, well, thank you. Thank you very much. What do you do when your values don't align with your job company?
That's a great question. So I think that's two-part. Number one, I think we have to always think of survival. People got to pay rent, right? I love when people say things like, hey, I don't like this company because of ABC, so I'm just going to leave. Whenever people tell me that, my first question is, well, do you have the financial freedom to do that, right? When you do not work for a company that when you do not work for a company that does not match your values, I would say it is time to make a transition plan. That does not mean that you have to leave tomorrow. Again, checking privilege. Not everyone has the financial freedom to just up and quit a job. And I want to make that very, very clear. I think right now in the world with all this activism, we hear a lot of people saying things like, I'm just leaving. And that's phenomenal if you can. A lot of people can't just leave, right? So if your morals and values do not align with the company, and you've made that very clear, then that to me says it's time for you to make a transition plan to leave. And in that transition plan, it's, well, where do you want to go where you think those values and morals align, right? Unfortunately, we only have so much time. Usually this is like a 6-hour workshop that I do with people. And in that we talk about that. But yeah, I think that it's really time for you to just think about leaving, but do not feel this pressure to just walk out because everyone else is walking out. You do not know everyone else's financial story. I think financial wealth and financial stability is a form of revolution and is a form of feminism. And we as women need to make sure that we're very clear and intentional about that. Not everyone has the income or the money in the savings account to just walk away, and that's okay.
Totally agree. First, you figure out whether you can pay your rent, and then think about changing the job, right? That's a good point. Important. A good point, a good down-to-earth point. I really agree with that. Thanks a lot, Lexi. It was such a pleasure to have you on our stage at our conference, and enjoy the rest of your conference. Please stay with us. Thank you very much.
Of course. Have a great day.
Thank you. Wow, that was super cool.